Ja, dus dit is de kerk inderdaad. Ja, kan niet anders. Maar dat die andere Ola, Stonse straat. Dat is de muziek zelf. Je hebt het een beetje nagepootst, hè? Ja, dus ik brandschilderde eraan. Ja, brandschilderde. Nog modern. Ik vond uw artikel, dat gaat er nog straks niet over, maar ik vond het commentaar te maken over het artikel wat u geschreven heeft op uw website over Rusland. Oh ja. Dat is zo mooi. Ja. Heel inlevend. En tegelijk zeggen, dit kan niet. Ik vind het perfect. Perfect verwoord, vind ik. Ja.
De laatste tijden ervaar ik heel veel emoties. Ja. In verbinding met, in verband met de oorlog met Oekraïne. Ja.
Hebt u in Rusland gewoond? Hebt u
nee, ik ben daar wakker geweest, maar niet gewoond. Nee, mijn ex-vrouw komt uit de Donbass.
Oh jee, dat meen je niet.
Russisch uit de Donbass.
Oh my goodness.
Met familie die daar nog steeds woont. Het is een drama. En we zijn nog steeds vrienden van elkaar. We zijn niet meer getrouwd, maar wel vrienden.
Wat familie in de grote steden?
Nee, Constantin. Platteland. We werden al gebombardeerd. Het is een drama.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you here coming. Special welcome to our speakers and moderator. And before I will give the word to you, I want to thank you again for coming. And on behalf of the whole team, we're happy that it's finally happening tonight. And we hope that you enjoy it.
Hey. All right. Well, this is a well-filled auditorium, especially for a night like this, because you would think you would watch the live stream in a bar or in a park or something. But I think it's unsurprising, really, because we'll be discussing the great questions of our time. As you already know, this forum is called The Death of God, Science, Faith and Limitations. So given the title, it won't be a small affair. And we got some heavyweight speakers with us today. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Bernardo Kastrup and Monsignor Dr. Everard de Jong. From now on, I will call them Bernardo and Everard. My name is Cornelis van der Plas. I'm your moderator today. I work normally as a journalist, but right now I'm serving as the leader of this discussion. I think it would be good to give a little hint on what the death of God could mean. As some of you know, or have read in the promo on social media, the phrase "God is dead and we have killed him" is from the famous German philosopher from the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, a lot of people think very different about that phrase, the death of God. We'll be getting into that tonight, but we're going to look about what the idea of the death of God has brought about. So many secular thinkers have used it quite literal. So it meaning that the Christian God, or any God for that matter, has ceased to be a point of reference for existence, human life, and that atheism has become a serious option as an intellectual position. Also now that God was not the point of reference for all knowledge and existential questions, writers and philosophers like Aldous Huxley took it upon themselves to declare science as the placeholder of belief. Reason and knowledge would now be the holy grail in aiding humanity to achieve greatness in such a sense, not belief in ancient texts like the Bible. So Christian thinkers, on the other hand, most of them theologians, have taken the popularity of this phrase, the death of God, for explaining the rise of secularity, the abandonment of traditional belief in God, in texts, and the utterance, the death of God, denoted a societal crisis which should be solved because modernity has compromised belief. So you can see in the 19th century and onward, till our very day now, that Christian ministers and theologians that set themselves to the task of repairing belief. So they want to go back to the fundamentals of it. And you can see this movement still today. For many, the idea of the death of God is still lingering in today's debate, informed by the idea of the death of God. The divide between science and religion seems unbridgeable nowadays. But today, as we've gained more insight in the limitations of science and in the way in which it cannot serve as a method to answer, for instance, existential questions, maybe the door has opened to reevaluate the relation between science and religion. And that's what we want to do tonight. So right now we are more aware of what we don't know. So is science as a God also dead? Or can they be friends in answering life's great questions? Are they equals in that respect? Or are we overlooking something? These are some of the questions that we want to be answering tonight. All right, so let's do a little poll. As you have seen, you've got a card, red and green, next to your chair. Of course, the answer red means no, and green means yes, of course. So let's do a little poll. Who thinks God is dead?
Whoa.
I think he's pretty dead tonight. I hope there will be some change, or not.
But that means that...
No, they denied your...
Exactly, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, no. Red means not dead. Green means very. So, anyone want to elaborate on that? Why they chose yay or nay?
The green card. I would like to hear the green
Anyone
card.
with the green card?
Who had a green card? No, God is dead. You?
Yeah.
So I think we have moral dilemmas which we cannot really justify regarding suffering, for example, when it comes to animal suffering in the wildlife, which we cannot reconcile with notions of God which we have today. For example, the notion of the Christian all-loving God. So I think those questions kind of dissolve into a kind of area where we cannot really solve them with traditional religion. So while there might be some new religious ideas coming up of this very abstract God who just creates physical ideas, the laws of metaphysics, etc., I don't think we can literally say that the religious gods which we have today can explain our world.
So we need more than only God to explain what's going on today. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone think the opposite?
You do believe God is still alive? Yeah, and why?
Go ahead.
Can you elaborate?
Okay, good evening. My name is Patrick. I do believe God is still alive and he will always be alive. For example, the question of how man came into existence, it's something scientists cannot really answer. So that I have life and I'm alive and I think God gave me the opportunity to be alive. That makes me believe that God exists. And from the moral viewpoint, God, as it is said in Trinity, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit exist in three forms. If he wanted to live and exist in that form, he would have done that. But he wanted a relationship. That was why he created us, to be able to have a fellowship with his creation. So the man would always want to know things. It was, the devil who rebelled against him was also a part of God's creation. And from then, sin came into humanity.
All right, thank you.
So praise.
So yeah, I think we've got already quite the opposite of the spectrum in thinking how God is alive or dead. Before we take off, let me tell you first about what Veritas Forum is. Veritas Forum organizes discussions about life's great questions, like, for instance, does God still exist, or is science the answer to all our life's great questions? And we will try to find those answers, but also give the Christian perspective on these questions. Veritas believes in the connection between the scientific knowledge and the personal questions of life. So we hope that by the end of the discussion, we also have touched on personal issues as well as intellectual and academic. So as some of you might know, Veritas means truth, of course. And that's why we'll try to understand the reality of life today, no less. Now, I would like to introduce the first speaker today, Monsignor Dr. Everard de Jong, and now, of course, I will call you Everard. He serves as an auxiliary bishop, hulbisschop in Nederlands, of the Diocese of Roermond. Not only did he study theology, but Everard has also acquired a PhD in the philosophy of science. He's not only intellectually informed about the debates between religion and science, he also is setting up a center in Maastricht to discuss topics around science and religion. And that's also here in the same city. I would now like to ask Everard to introduce himself further and explain to us his personal interest in this topic and why it's so important.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This whole story connected to my life, but as a child, I was very fascinated by the radio in my parents' room. It was my room too. I was the oldest of 6 children. And I was very fascinated by the fact that there is something in the air that by this machine becomes audible. Very interesting. So if something invisible, untouchable, becomes audible, and then that happens. I studied later electronics because from that moment on I wanted to become an electronic engineer working at Philips laboratory. I was living just a couple of 100 meters away from the place where he worked. But I didn't want to only study during secondary school, so I started with the what's now called VMBO, it's the technical education, and then MTS. But at the end of the MTS, I was interested in two things. First, paranormal activities, and some clairvoyant people said, everyone is a little clairvoyant, so I started looking at my own feelings, and I noticed some premonitions. When I thought of doing something, I felt I should not do that. And when I would do it anyway, things didn't work out well. So then I wanted to go to the HTS, which is the higher technical education, and I felt, no, I should not do that. But from what? So I listened to this voice. I looked around in Eindhoven, where I was born, and I wanted to become a kind of physicist or chemist or whatever. But every time the same feeling came up, this is not it. And then the time for admission was gone, and so what I did was, the second development that came to me was during the second their school. I lost my faith. I had to go to church, but it was just nonsense. And but then I read a book of a Belgian woman who said she spoke to Jesus because Jesus spoke in her heart, she said, and she answered that. And I was so struck by the fact what Jesus said to her, it resonated in my own heart. And I thought, wow, so Jesus really exists still? And then when this HTS thing happened, I asked Jesus on my knees before my bed with the cross before me. I said, Jesus, what do you want me to do then? And then I got a kind of aerial letter type, neon light word in my head somewhere. I don't know where, but it just appeared there. So it took seconds, and there was the word priest. Priest. I thought, should I become a priest? Oh, but then there was so much peace and so much security that I gave in, and I became a priest. And I've never have any doubt about it anymore. And that was a great big problem because I did believe in a secret way. I never told anyone that I prayed before going to bed, and now I had to come out. You're out of the cupboard, they say. And so.
I hope not today.
But anyway, there was no. But then, and my brothers, they heard it on the 1st of April. They thought it was a joke. But then I studied in the seminary, and they saw that I was very interested in science still, and I'm still. So they sent me to study philosophy in Rome and 3 years in Washington. And I did my PhD on the Aristotelianism of Galileo Galilei, and the change into kind of modern scientist later in his life. And I came back to be a student chaplain here in the 90s. And then I became auxiliary bishop, and now I'm also the army bishop in the Netherlands. So I work with soldiers and the spiritual care of the soldiers in Holland. And I think it's very much possible to reconcile faith and science, because science has a certain method. And if you apply this method very well, then it's very good for all of us. Of course, there are areas that if you apply this methodological approach well, I think you cannot say certain things about certain realities. If you, for instance, deny any spiritual existence, how can you cannot measure it, but can you then say that it doesn't exist? So there's an epistemological question and there is an ontological question. And that I think we should be aware of that scientists shouldn't talk about spiritual things if they want to keep faithful to their own method. And philosophers can, of course. So I think philosophy is a wonderful bridge between faith and science, because they can talk about everything. And I hope this evening will be a little philosophical too.
Thank you, Everard. Thank you for explaining your position already. Now, on to Bernardo. Yes, the other speaker of tonight. We don't only have one, but two experts on the subject. Bernardo has a doctorate in ontology and philosophy of mind, if I'm correct, but also in computer engineering, which included AI and reconfigurable computing. I don't know what it is, but you could help me explain that. As a scientist, you work for the European Organization for Nuclear Laboratories, better known as CERN, and Philips Research Laboratory. So you have indeed something in common. Yeah, Bernardo, you are known for your stance against materialism. That's you wrote a famous book about that. But could you also explain further your personal interest in the topics of today and why it's important to you?
Well, we are talking about the nature of reality and truth, which is like just the most important question one can ask. So even as a kid, before I could formulate the question to myself, the question was latent in me all along. My education was mostly secular. My father had an interest in science and a subscription to Scientific American, which I started browsing when I was, 5 years old. My mother is a Catholic, but she never really pushed me in that direction, and I just observed her simple faith. But I mostly grew up thinking about the big question in analytic terms, scientific terms, if you will. Ended up doing computer engineering, largely motivated by the dream of building an AI at some point, a strong AI, a machine that could behave like a human and would be as intelligent as a human. Of course, back in the early to mid-90s, AI was nowhere near where it is today. Theoretically, it was, but we didn't have the computing power to make anything significant happen. So I ended up doing data acquisition for high-energy physics experiments, also using AI on the side to do that. And if you do that long enough, at some point you ask yourself, if I build something intelligent, what does it take to make it also conscious? In other words, that it not only processes data like I do, but that it experiences this data processing as I do. What do I need to do to get to that? And a couple of years dealing with this question brings you to a wall, because your assumption is that consciousness is somehow created by material arrangements. But soon enough, you realize that whatever you change in the material arrangements as far as structure and function is concerned, you get no closer and no further away from answering the question of consciousness. These things are completely incommensurable. And that's when it hit me that my basic assumptions were wrong. Including the basic assumption that consciousness is somehow derivative from material arrangements, that it became very, very patently clear to me that that's not the case, which basically meant that I had to throw away my entire worldview. And we are meaning-seeking animals. We cannot live in a vacuum of narratives. We have to have a narrative in terms of which to relate to nature, to the world, to each other. So I went down a rabbit hole looking for an alternative narrative that would stand up to the evidence that would stand up to reason, not be internally contradictory like physicalism is or materialism. And I think the answer is a lot easier and self-evident than we give it credit for. Culture has manufactured plausibility for a number of very nonsensical assumptions that we, by and large, make. And if you see through those, the path to take is not complicated, it's not sophisticated, it's not difficult, it's not intellectually demanding. It's very, very self-evident. And that's what I've been trying to communicate for over 10 years now.
Does religion come into that equation?
Of course.
Yeah.
Religion and science are two different ways of approaching the mystery, and they have their merits and their limitations. I wouldn't merge the two. I think it would be the end of both if you did that. For me, religion, faith, it's not just belief. Actually, it's not belief. It's a sincere inner openness to the mystery. That's what faith is. It's an openness to the mystery. It's the realization that we are primates. We are going around with an intellect for about 30,000 years, maybe 50,000. In other words, it wasn't even yesterday. It was a blink of an eye ago. And to imagine that this conceptual apparatus that we call the intellect, which is so young, to imagine that it can corral and capture everything that is salient about reality, insofar as the meaning of our lives is concerned, it is a preposterous idea. There are things that cannot be captured through conceptual models and logical reasoning. This is so appallingly self-evident that the fact that we forget it is just unbelievable. And I think religion is an openness to whatever we cannot capture through analytical conceptual reasoning.
And that's where we come on your stance on contemporary hard science or materialism or mechanical science, however you want to call it, right? You're well known for your stance against materialism as a worldview, as a conception, you say. You even called it baloney on the title of one of your books.
I was very kind when I said that.
Yeah, so but you were more humble in the pages than you were on the title. But can you help us? What is materialism and why is it baloney?
Metaphysical materialism is the notion that not only there is a world out there beyond our individual minds, but that world is itself non-mental. It's not mind stuff. It's pure abstraction. It's made of an entity defined, we call it matter, and we define matter under materialism as something that can be exhaustively described in terms of numbers. In other words, if you produce a long enough list of numbers, you will have said everything there is to say about the world out there. Yeah. And that mind somehow is a byproduct, an epiphenomenon, a derivative of that purely abstract thing. Now, there are so many ways that this is wrong. In terms of empirical evidence, in terms of internal contradiction. I could speak for a day.
What is the most important internal contradiction of materialism you find?
A materialist is a mind that conceptualizes something that is not mind. In other words, it's an abstraction of the materialist's mind, and then the materialist tries to reduce his own mind to that abstraction of his mind. It's like a dog chasing its tail.
A dog chasing its tail.
You never catch. You never figure that out. It's like a painter that paints a self-portrait, like Van Gogh paints a self-portrait, and then Van Gogh points at the portrait and says, I am that portrait. Mm-hmm. And now I have to somehow explain my inner life in terms of the distribution of pigments on canvas. And that's, of course, impossible. That's exactly what the materialist does. We call it the hard problem of consciousness. But there are many other reasons. I mean, materialism assumes something that we know is patently not true. It cannot be true. This has been demonstrated even mathematically more than once. It assumes that the world has the forms that we perceive on the screen of perception. Like in the real world of materialism, there is something that has the shape of this glass. It doesn't have the qualities of the glass, doesn't have color, doesn't have texture. These are supposed to be generated by my brain inside my head.
We are our brain, essentially.
Yeah.
That's the materialist point of view.
Yeah, well, but it does say that there is something with the shape of a glass out there, and that something would exist irrespective of my or our perception of it. That's patently untrue. The screen of perception is not a transparent window into the world. It cannot be. We would die. The screen of perception is a dashboard of instruments. Our sense organs make measurements about the world. Those measurements are presented to us in the form of the screen of perception. It's like the dashboard of an airplane. We are pilots flying in an airplane that has no transparent windows, only the dashboard. Is that enough? Of course it is. We can fly by instruments. Evolution has given us a very accurate dashboard in the sense that it conveys accurate, actionable information about what's out there. But what we do is we say the world is the dashboard. And that's just nonsensical. Of course it's not.
And the materialistic point of view is the scientific point of view.
No. To speak as a purist, science is not metaphysics. Science studies and models and predicts the behavior of nature. It says nothing about what nature is. It's only when scientists begin to philosophize then
you think it's going wrong.
Then it goes wrong.
Okay.
Then you conflate science with the metaphysics of materialism, and these are very different things.
Okay. And why is it so important for today's discussion to think about materialism as baloney? What is the relation to science and religion, you think?
It's a kind of baloney that tries to eliminate the mystery in a completely artificial way. Because if you think the world is the dashboard, well, you can see the dashboard. So that's all there is to it. Whatever is behind the dashboard that the airplane sensors are measuring, collecting information about, it doesn't exist. There is only the dashboard. So now life becomes incredibly claustrophobic, because even though the big questions are not answered by materialism, including the question of how can there be experience if experience is not fundamental, no, all we have is experience. Materialism doesn't explain that. In a sense, materialism explains precisely nothing. But despite that, it forces us to think that there is no sky outside. There is just the dashboard.
Yours numbers.
Yeah, and life becomes claustrophobic and meaningless because it washes over the depth, the gargantuan depth of the mystery in which we are in. We are bang in the middle of it.
Thank you.
And that's a tragedy.
All right. So let's take a quick breather, of course. We've heard Bernardo's point of view. I think we've all got our own opinion on the subject, but let's do a little poll again. Grab on your red and green cards. So we've talked a bit about materialism, about science. Can science help figure out life's great questions? And green is, of course, yes. Red is, of course, no. So I see a lot of optimism with science and the great questions. But somebody with a green card would like to elaborate.
Oh my God.
Take it easy.
I never heard my voice on microphone, so this is kind of weird. Yeah, okay. But you said that science is contradiction, like it has internal contradictions, but I don't think science thinks that's bad.
Materialism has internal contradictions, not science. Materialism is a metaphysics, not a scientific theory.
Oh, okay. But what was the question? Now I forgot.
The question was, can science help figure out?
Oh, yeah.
That's a great question.
Well, if we cannot do it right straight away, it doesn't mean that we are not going to be able to do it in future. I mean, science is advancing, and like what I don't like about the alternative answer is that it's definitive, like it's saying mystery is kind of solved, and that removes actually the mystery, because we kind of know the answer straight away, and I don't like that. I like that we still have area to discover. I don't know.
Thank you. Someone with the red card would like to speak against.
In fact, she was red, I think.
Was you? Sorry, oh, you were red, eh?
No, but if you say that
What's
science
green?
can't solve all the problems,
Yeah.
then affect your red, no? Or didn't I understand the question? No, the question
No problem.
was...
The question was, can science help explain it all? I think you were saying it.
I mean, I'm not saying that it can solve all the problems. I mean, I don't know that as of now.
Mhm.
I have limitations regarding my time frame, but maybe in future we can help to solve the issues. So yeah, I guess that's yes.
Okay, but later you said that there will be always a mystery or whatever. So then science cannot explain. Yeah. So it's more a hope than a... Okay. Yeah.
All right. Hopeful is good. Well, Bernardo, what do you think?
That science can help tackle the mysteries. Of course, obviously it can. It has already. I don't have a grudge against science. On the contrary, I've done science all my life. If you look at my work today, it's largely based on science, maybe even entirely based. But we have to be careful when we pretend that a metaphysical assumption is a scientific fact. That's when things go wrong. That's when you sort of usurp science for a metaphysical purpose, and you misuse it, and that can lead to a path that will never go anywhere and just waste time and energy. Let me give you an example. It is a metaphysical assumption that mind is not primary, that mind is somehow generated by the machinery inside our skull. This is not a scientific hypothesis. What is science is that there are correlations between patterns of brain activity and subjective experience. Now, there are many ways to make sense of this, including that patterns of brain activity are what subjective experience looks like from an outside perspective, in which case the brain would be the image of conscious inner life, not what generates conscious inner life. This is just one example. But when we take that metaphysical hypothesis for a fact, and we make that assumption without even knowing it's an assumption, then things can go wrong, because then we use promissory notes to avoid correcting our mistakes. For instance, imagine that one would make the assertion that I have a map in my hands, and that the land in Limburg is generated by the map of Limburg. In other words, the map comes first, and then there comes the territory. But nobody can articulate how is it exactly that Limburg can come out of the map of Limburg. We don't have an answer for that. And then we say, well, science, one day we offer that answer. It will be, we just need map version 2.0 or map version 1423. It will never get there, because we are just completely reversing the line of thinking. And materialism is exactly this, metaphorically. Materialism is the following. We use numbers to describe the world as it appears on perception. These numbers are what define, for instance, mass, charge, momentum, geometrical relationships, amplitude, frequency. There's a whole list of numbers that we use to describe the world. And then we do something very strange. We say that the numbers come before the thing described. The numbers are what we call matter. That matter is just this pure abstraction that's just numbers, and qualities somehow arise out of that in the confines of our skull. It's a very strange inversion of the thing. It's like saying, well, one day we will be able to make a map so good that we'll be able to reach into it and pull Limburg out of the map of Limburg. And if I say this will never happen, then people turn to me and say, well, you don't have faith in science. Science goes forward. Well, no, faith in science is not a band-aid for stupidity. It shouldn't provide us an excuse to entertain stupid ideas forever. We should be alert to the internal contradictions of the logic we are pursuing. And materialism is just that. It's a pile of internal contradictions, including contradictions of the evidence. If you look at foundations of physics and even the neuroscience of consciousness, there is nothing wrong from a scientific perspective to review one's metaphysical assumptions. A metaphysics, from a scientific perspective, is just a convenient fiction, and convenient fictions should be changed. They have changed. Newton once had this convenient fiction that there was this invisible force that acted instantaneously at a distance and held astronomical bodies together. And it took the French 50 years to stop laughing about that. What we mean, invisible forces? Holding things together at a distance instantaneously? And then at some point we adopted that convenient fiction until Einstein came along 100 years ago and we dropped it. There is no such invisible force of gravity. That's not what gravity is. It's not an invisible force. What is going on, really, is that the invisible fabric of space-time bends and twists. That's the current convenient fiction. Well, by the way, actually, not really, because loop quantum gravity is throwing that away. The fabric of space-time is no longer primary. Time is no longer primary. It's something that arises in principle from microscopic quantum processes. Convenient fictions are there to be used for as long as they are convenient and then thrown away. And materialism as a metaphysics is just a fiction that was convenient in the early 20th century. In the time of positivism and behaviorism, all that nonsense, it was convenient because it allowed scientists to have an attitude of objectivity that wasn't present before. In the meantime, the evidence is screaming to us for over 40 years that that convenient fiction doesn't bloody work. And well, we either accept that or we keep on believing that map version 2 will be so good that you pull Limburg out of it. Maybe.
Thank you very much. So, if I'm correct, science will never produce the perfect map, just the best convenient fiction that is in store at that moment.
It's all that is needed. If nature behaves as though those convenient fictions were true, that's all it takes. We can develop technology based on that. And we have put a spaceship on an asteroid or whatever, based on Newton's convenient fictions. We didn't even need to use Einstein's convenient fictions. But if you make astronomical observations, say of the orbit of Mercury, well, Newton's convenient fiction is no longer convenient. It doesn't add up. You need Einstein's convenient fiction. We throw convenient fictions away all the time, and we keep doing that. That's what the scientific mind requires.
All right. Thank you very much. Also, Everard, you are well known. I think you probably want to react to that, of course, but you are well known for your position of criticizing that science as a system wants to explain everything, and on the pure and rational and natural level. I think you might be closer to Bernardo than you think.
Depends on the definition of science. You know, the present-day definition of science is materialistic. That's a kind of presupposition. First principle of way of approaching things in order to be secure, in order not to be subjective, in order to be validating and verifying and falsifying things. Then you need to have kind of quantitative measurements of things that others can repeat. And in that sense, I do think that science will never ever solve all the problems. Because, for instance, subjective experience will never be able to be grasped by an objective science. My subjective experience of you, I don't think they'll ever be able to kind of clone my consciousness and see what I experience myself here in an objective way that science now pretends to be able to. I think that's part of the problem that Bernardo wants to explain. If I'm wrong, of course you correct. That there is something, we objectify our subjective experience and then think we're scientific, so that's the map of our own mind.
So if I may interrupt, what is the kind of knowledge that science presents, in your opinion?
No, at the moment it's kind of materialistic model of reality that pretends to be the real image of reality. So the model pretends to be the reality. And I think there is a reality, for instance, a spiritual reality, that can never be expressed in material. Of course, material. If I for instance, I love angels. I think there are spiritual entities that are not material. So there are spiritual entities that might have some influence in the material world, but are independent spiritual entities that maybe you could call them vortexes or whatever, that are not material. in the medieval sense, because not material is also very, you have to really define what is material, of course. But in the sense that it is not measurable. You can't measure an angel. But so if you can't measure it, there is no scientific evidence for an angel. That's the interesting thing. And so I don't think that science as such will ever discover an angel, because you have to measure the influence of an angel, but the angel is free to either show itself or not. And now the next question is, how are you sure of there being angels? And then I say there might be some other ways of knowing, like intuition or revelation, that tell me that these beings are there, and even that these angels or God, who's still more immaterial, might kind of show himself or themselves to me in a way that is more like clairvoyancy, or kind of imagining things that you cannot see through your senses. So I think senses are not the only way of perceiving the world, and not even and not being able to. So I do think in the end, and maybe I'm a little more optimistic about knowing the world. I think in general we are able to know reality as it is, but it's not only with the science as we experience science now, but it's the capacity for us as conscious beings to in fact know the whole reality. I'm quite optimistic about knowing. But again, I agree with my opponent or past partner or whatever, that materialism is part of reality, but it's not all reality. And
So we talked about how science comes to knowledge, but what is the religious way of coming to knowledge? You talked about angels, you talked about different things.
No, that's very interesting. I'm a Christian, so I talked about Jesus, for instance. So, and now the question for people in Jesus' time was, is he God or is he not God? And the rest of the centuries we have been discussing that trouble. So Arianism says he's just a man, and other people say he's God. And so how would you discern that Jesus is God? Now, then it depends on the definition of God, of course. How do you define God? If you say he's the cause of everything, of all existence, so what kind of existence does he himself have? Is that a superior existence? Is it an analogous existence? What does it mean that God exists? That's the first thing to ask yourself. Who is God? And how does Jesus show that he is God? He says, whom sees me, sees the Father. Okay, that's nice. So how can I see in you that you are God? In that time, they crucified him for saying that. So what is it? I think, first of all, you have to be open for some transcendent experience in the meeting Jesus. If you look into his eyes, but also miracles and raising from the dead. I think these are signs of some superior possibility that at least this resurrection is a sign of his at least superior power above normal creatures. But then you have to be open to realizing this. You know, we have a Catholic faith, and then we have Lourdes. You have ever heard of Lourdes? There's a little place in south of France, and there's a little girl in the 58. She saw Mary, she said. And at that place, there are many miracles. Many people get healed there. And I told my brother, he's a physicist, I said, maybe you should go to Lourdes and maybe you start believing, because there are many miracles. I said, oh, no, I don't have to go there. So why not? Now, these baths, if it's really scientific, then this bath in which someone gets healed should be the source of the healing of another person. But that isn't like that. It's not repeatable. It's not experimentally verifiable. So it might statistically happen that there are more healings, but I can never ever find the cause, never the scientific reason for that, because it's not according to my principles in my setting to control it, that something happens. So stochastically it might be more frequent, but scientifically I want to know the cause, and I cannot find the cause if it's not kind of repeatable by myself. So, but then I think in order to know reality, you should also be open to things that are happening only once, and not only repeatable. So I think science is not the only way to know things, because if you only experience one time a near-death experience, for instance. I know a couple of people who have had a near-death experience. Scientists can say, oh, that's a shortage of CO2 in the brain or whatever. But these people have really changed in their behavior. They see things, they long for going back to that light. That's a subjective experience of something really superior? Can I, as a scientist, repeat that in people? I think it's unethical to put people in that situation again. So you can't. So I think there are personal experiences that give you the impression and are so impressive that you can see there is something more than science in the present way as it presents itself can show and prove.
So religion tries to account for the more personal aspect of knowledge.
Yeah, and in general also for communal knowledge, because many people can have the same experience and then they can talk about it. But only those who have this experience have the language to understand one another, and others don't even know the depth of the experience behind the words you use to communicate this experience.
So I think we can conclude that, of course, science and religion have a sort of different ways in coming to knowledge in their own respect.
Yeah.
There's a tension, I think you also agree. But how does you as a bishop evaluate, the scientific claim to knowledge?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Yeah, that's very interesting. Because we have saints, for instance, we have now this saint that has been declared with the Pope, Titus Brandsma. You know him? Yeah. Titus Brandsma, he was during the Second World War, he was trying to get the press against the Germans. I don't know whether the Germans here, but that's long ago. So, interesting. He was killed, and then he was so virtuous that people say we should pray to him in order to get some graces from God. He's a mediator. No, he's not God, so don't worry. When other Protestants here, they don't like saints, but in order to be canonized, you need to do 2 miracles. And now, of course, the Church has to discern whether it's a real miracle, which you can attribute to that intercession of that saint. So we ask all kinds of doctors, medical professionals to say, is this healing that has happened after praying to this saint, is this unexplainable with natural means, or is it explainable by natural means, or is it just happening all the time, or even in seldom cases that you can say, okay, 1 in 10,000 times this happens, it's a natural recurrence of your health, so you can't say this is a miracle. So of course the borders of this scientific community go further and further, so it's ever more difficult to claim a miracle. So we use science in order to exclude natural causes, so there is still some room for some supernatural causes. So there is this balance. Yeah.
Are you not afraid that science will figure out those supernatural causes?
I hope that when there are only natural causes, and we look them over, or later they discover that there were natural causes, that science will be invited to say, okay, we are not afraid of science, because we're so convinced that there is a supernatural way of happening sometimes, that we're not of science maybe explaining everything in a natural way, not in a materialistic way, but what does matter? I mean, matter evolves and evolves every time. So we are not afraid of nature, but we are. I'm so convinced that there is a supernatural world. You prove me that it is not there, please, because you can't prove it is not there.
All right, we'll try tonight. No, just kidding, or not. Well, in reaction to Everard's story, I would like to ask you a question again. Does religion tell the whole story? And you can use your vote in reaction to Everard's story. So, does religion tell the whole story about life, about anything? Yes or no? Of course, you can say yourself what the story is in your respect. They're on the side? Yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on, I guess, the question and how you interpret what you asked. So the way that I interpret the question that you asked is, does religion explain or tell us the only story that matters? And the answer is yes.
What is that story for you?
So the most pressing questions that we all have about why are we here, what is the meaning of life, what is good, what is beautiful, what is the truth. So our pursuit of all of those things continues, regardless of how advanced science is going to get. I know that we have very optimistic views about science, but our pursuit of just even those three things in the most simplest manner, truth, beauty, and and the good. So that's something that we're always going to try to pursue, and religion offers us the explanation to those things. So to me, that is the highest truth.
Okay, thank you very much. In front of here, right in front. What's your answer to the question?
I had both cards.
You had both cards, so you were very much in doubt.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know. I agree with you back there. It's I was baptized Lutheran, grew up, very much listen to the intuition when I'm confused. I pray. I pray every day, and for me, it usually shows the path to go. But sometimes I do still have doubt, and that's just, I guess. Sometimes I want science, but sometimes I just need my faith, and my faith will take me where I need to go. And I don't know. I just can't explain it. It's just a feeling. I just trust my like you said in the beginning, Monsignor. Just trust that feeling inside, the intuition. For me, that's for me. That's my path, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Bernardo, there's a lot of optimism about religion and the answering of all questions. What do you think?
I despair at what we are doing with religion, especially in the West. Churches are turning into museums, and prayer has turned into a ritual for telling God what to do. I don't think this is the spirit of the thing. At least that's not how I see religion. In a sense, I am unbiased because unlike some of my colleagues who are atheists because they want to take revenge on their former selves, they were very religious when they were younger, and then they grow up and they look back and they think, oh, I was so stupid, and now they have an agenda to take revenge on their former selves. I don't have that. Religion was never imposed on me. It was just on the periphery. I could see it. So I think my attitude towards religion is, I like to think it's less biased, and it is positive, but we are making a mess of it. Let me tell you how I see religion. Suppose that I were to tell you time is a river. I use this metaphor often. You could react in two ways. You could take it literally and say, Bernardo, nonsense, time is not a river. Or you could be a little bit more sophisticated and try to grasp the intended meaning as opposed to the spoken words. And then you would regard my statement as meaning the following. There is something about time that is the same as something about a river. And I can't tell you what it is. I don't have the word for it. So I would just tell you time's a river, and I will hope that you will do the work to understand what I mean. Now, science is when you come up with a concept and you say, flow. The river flows, time flows. So you don't say time's a river. Nonsense. Time is not a river. But time flows, and the river flows. And now we have a neat conceptual model in order to grab hold of the intended meaning. But again, we are monkeys. We have an intellect for about 30,000 years. To think that this intellect has evolved the conceptual armor that is required to take a hold of everything that is salient is just preposterous. It's nonsensical. It's anti-scientific. So there are a great many things that are probably true. I don't know what they are, but there are a great many things about nature, about the world, that are probably the case, that obtain, that are true, that we don't have concepts for. And for those things, all we can do is to say, time's a river. And that's religion.
And that's a religion.
Yeah.
So that's what goes wrong. You say something goes wrong when you're considering religion in respect to like a metaphor, like time flows. What's exactly going wrong in your opinion?
I think it can go wrong in two ways. One is when you literalize it. It's as bad or worse than to deny it completely, because then you're just flattening it like a pancake, and you're completely ignoring and making an effort to ignore the message that is being attempted to convey. And I think a lot of religious people actually do that. It's take it all for the literal truth, because in some sense that is reassuring or provides some kind of self-affirmation. I don't know the psychology of the situation, but I see it happening. The other extreme, which is equally bad, is to say, well, we know what's going on. We figured it out, except for some final details. And that's a horrendously idiotic approach to things. Lord Kelvin said we had reached the end of physics. He said that by around 1900. 5 years later, Einstein came around and completely reversed that idea. Today we are a little more humble when it comes to physics, and scientists who are actually doing science, as opposed to science popularizers who are not scientists. They're not doing the hard work. Often they don't know what they're saying. But for the common person on the street, there is this cultural ethos that we've figured it out. That not only the details are left. Now we still have to reconcile, quantum field theory with relativity. Yeah, we still have to unify the 17 quantum fields. Yeah, now all these abstract details and so. But by and large, this stuff we've figured it out. No, we haven't figured anything out. We are in the position of a 5-year-old kid who is world champion playing a computer game. And that kid has a convenient fiction about what's going on. There is a little man inside the screen, and if that little man shoots there, he scores points, and if he touches that wall, he dies. Is that what's going on? Of course not. It's all the hardware, the software, the pixels, memory accesses, CPUs, and DRAMs, and whatnot. The kid doesn't know any of that. The kid wins the game. He's world champion. That's what we are. That's the position we are in today. We win the world championship of technology. Does it mean that we know what's going on? Of course not. We just have a convenient fiction that is such that nature behaves as though that fiction were true. The computer game behaves as though the fiction of a little man inside the screen were true. And that's all the kid needs to win the game. That's all we need to develop technology.
So these fictions, they denote limitations in religion as well as science, if I'm correct?
I think what we miss is epistemic humbleness.
Humbleness.
It's the understanding that there's a whole lot of stuff we don't know. We think we know. But throughout history, we fell flat on the ground on our faces. And we look back and we laugh at all of our predecessors. Scientists in the 1600s came up with this notion of effluvium, this invisible substance that was elastic, and it was supposed to connect chaff to amber. And it was the model for electrostatic attraction. Chaff clings to amber. If you rub amber, chaff, what's left of the wheat when you actually take the wheat out. Yeah. And so they had this theory that there was this invisible substance that you couldn't cut, you couldn't touch, you couldn't see, and it was elastic, and that's what pulled the shaft to amber. And then we look back and we laugh at this. Oh, those guys were idiots. Our predecessors, scientists, those guys were so naive. And what we miss is that convenient fiction actually explained the observations of the time. It was useful at the time. And we think that was nonsense, and our convenient fictions of today, they're not just useful, they are actually true. And even though every generation before us was wrong when they considered their convenient fictions the actual truth, we think today it's actually true. And I tell you, 50 years from now, the next generation will come around and they will look at us and say, those idiots, what we now think, that's the truth. And we'll go on merrily on this game until one day, you fall flat on your face enough times, and one day you just get a grip, and you realize there is a mystery here that we are nowhere near even being acquainted with, let alone understanding.
But are we evolving towards somewhere to a greater knowledge, or is it always just something different every time?
No, I think there is a learning. It's more excruciatingly slow than we like to think. We need repeated lessons and more repetitions of the repetitions. Many reruns, but we are going somewhere. Yes.
Nearing perfection, or the greatest model we could develop for?
I don't think the cognitive apparatus of a primate on planet Earth will ever evolve to the point where we can just figure it all out. I mean, this is supremely naive to think that. I would say it's anti-scientific to think that. But we can certainly escape this claustrophobic prison of meaninglessness that began in the second half of the 19th century as a reaction to anxiety.
That's of course a reference to the death
Nietzsche.
of God.
Well, Nietzsche saw it before others saw. He didn't set this process in motion. He just had a particular kind of attention that allowed him to see that. And it's been now 150 years, give or take. And in some ways it's been fantastic when it comes to technology. And in some ways it's been dreadful.
I may interrupt you for a minute, because I found it very interesting. Everard, you were quite optimistic when it came to, if we're ever going to know everything about the natural world, or how would you call it. How would you react to Bernardo?
I love the word to be humble, because I think indeed religious people might be too simplistic sometimes and say, this is it. We have even a negative theology that we know better what God is not than what he is, because he's so transcendent that we should be ever careful to just think that we know him, because we never know him. He's always escaping our mind. And so we have a kind of solution to that we think, or we believe that after death our mind is more open, more free. We don't need the brains anymore to think that we will be able to see him as he is. And I believe that, to be honest. I'm not so negative about the fact that we have a primate's mind or something like that. At least in the Catholic faith, we think that every soul of a human being, not of an ape, but of a human being, there's a real essential distinction between a primate and a human being, is created by God itself, because there is something spiritual about it. There is something not material about it. I heard you say in a YouTube video that you don't know whether there is a soul that might survive the body. We think it does. So, and I think that, like people that get Alzheimer or something like that, or they get a brain tumor, or they get some kind of wound in the head, they might be hindered in communicating in a normal way with people, and then people think, oh, their brain deteriorates, so their mind deteriorates. My impression is that the mind is still there, but it's not able to communicate itself with the world through a damaged brain. So the mind is prime, and I love your idealism in that sense that me too, I think. I love to say that the whole world is information. It's kind of, but what is information? It's kind of intelligence. There is no information, I think, without meaning. And where does the meaning come from? It's kind of intelligence. And I think also this great intelligence that created the world, and that in some way as a created intelligence is present in the world, everywhere, where there's life and even where there's dead matter, it's so intelligently composed that if this God created this whole intelligent world, including us, he must be even more intelligent, otherwise he couldn't have created us. But I think he created us according to his image, and I'm very positive about being able to know this world that he created, and that we will meet, we will meet at the end, and then be very happy to see something that is still inexhaustible, so that we will never see him as he really is, because he's always transcending our deepest image and deepest desires. And sometimes people complain about, oh, in heaven we have to be forever, and that's boring. What is there? We have to eat every day. No. It's wow, magnificent. Some mystics have had this experience some way, that they saw God, or some light, and even people who had this near-death experience, when I talked to them, They said it was so beautiful. I can't describe it. I'm longing for it. There's a hunger, a kind of. So I'm looking forward to that situation. Although I love to be here in my earthly body still, but I do believe that we'll go there. Yeah, and know much more than here. You know, there is this. For instance, this discoverer of the benzene. I forgot the name of the guy. So he was thinking about what is the structure, the chemical structure of benzene. This is 6 C's and some H's. I'm not a chemist, I'm sorry. But then he had a dream in which he saw a snake biting his own tail. And then he realized, wow, it's not a linear structure, it's a circular structure. And that turned out to be true. And also Einstein, for instance, he said, the best ideas I got when I don't think rationally. So when you think rationally, you have to A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and that's the lines of a program, a computer. I like, you know much more about it, so I'm a lay person. Quantum computing is much more fuzzy logic. It's much more all together, and I think that's kind of what we would compare to intuition. That, and sometimes I do that. Very interesting. If I have a very complex problem, I let it be, and maybe I get a little sleep, and then. But if you try to grasp it, you will never solve it. But if you leave it there, things start moving to the right direction, and they come together in a way that you didn't expect before. But it shows new insights, new apotheoses. So. Sorry, I might be crucified for this, but I think it's the difference, which is a very old-fashioned way of describing its analogy, so don't worry that I'm pushing someone in a certain cocoon or whatever. But I think it's more a male and female way of thinking. Because men tend to be, I think, more rational, and a female is just more intuitive and say, okay, we can handle this like this, and we are more flexible. And so this knowledge is what I'm talking about. It's more the female knowledge. It's more the intuitive knowledge that is more wholesome. It's more holistic than reductionistic. So I'm a very great fan of holistic thinking instead of this reductionistic thinking. Although I think it's complementary. I'm not against any of this, but we tend to forget at all about holistic. Also about man, you know. If you talk about a human being, I buy every year this manual of the molecular cell biology, which is hugely interesting. What they discover about the cell and all the organelles, and so my favorite is this ATP synthesis, for instance, and then how it turns, and then anyway, you can look at the animation at the internet. But then, who's in charge of the unity of the cell? Who's in charge of the unity of the organism? Who's in charge of us as human beings? As a whole. It's interesting that the DNA isn't. The DNA is not steering where the form is of the one cell. If you have the first cell of a human being, it has to grow. Then you have the head and the tail, or not the tail, but the feet. You have the left side, the form of the brain, form of the eye, the form of the hand. Where does it come from? It's not in the genes. You can't tell me that it's in the genes. So if a scientist doesn't dare to think about this kind of questions, you don't solve the problem of who's a being. And so we need a new phenomenology of looking at things in order to have a new science. And then we know much more than now.
All right, Everard, you talked about meaning, epiphanies, and also about the unity of life. Bernardo, how do you react to Everhard's theory?
I'm not a dualist. There are scientists who are. There is a scientist who is a trialist. Actually, the latest Nobel Prize winner in physics, Sir Roger Penrose. Yeah. You could characterize him as a trialist, matter, mind, and Platonic values, according to him. I'm a monist, but I do grant that dualism can be a convenient fiction. In other words, that nature can be such that it behaves as if, under certain circumstances, dualism were true. Let me try to explain this, because I think we have more in common than what's coming across. I think the material world, what we call the physical world, is a dashboard representation of the actual world out there. We are pilots in an airplane cockpit without transparent windows. We can't see the storm outside as it actually is. All we have are sensors, our sense organs, that make measurements of the world and present those measurements to us in a certain form that we call the screen of perception. That's the dashboard. The physical world is a representation on a dashboard. But it's not the real world. The real world is the thing that is measured in order for those measurements to appear on the dashboard. It's the sky outside the skin of the airplane. Now keep in mind that this is all monism. The dashboard exists in the same world as the sky outside the airplane. But if you were born in the airplane cockpit and all you've ever had is the dashboard, you don't realize that there is much more to that one world than you think there is. Because you grew up in a culture that tells you the dashboard is the world. It's all there is. There is only the dashboard. Now we know mathematically this cannot be. There are entropy arguments for this. If we saw the world as it is, there would be no upper bound to the dispersion of our internal states, so we wouldn't be able to maintain our structural integrity. I mean, this can go on and on. It's something we know, that the dashboard representation is accurate in the sense that it conveys accurate information about the world, but it's not a mirror image of the world, and it isn't the world. So how does dualism account for this? Dualism would tell you that the dashboard is one substance, and the world outside the airplane skin is another substance. It could be that things work as though that were true.
I'm not a dualist. I'm sorry if you think I'm dual. I think there are two aspects of reality. That's one, if the reductionist approach will discover the atoms and whatever, and the holistic approach sees the whole. And that's two aspects that are both valid. And of course I know the primary qualities that are the quantities are that what we measure. But we don't, there are no colors in the world. That's a frequency of a certain nanometer, or a certain wavelength of a certain nanometer, and we perceive it as red or green or what. So I agree that the perception of the reality as we see it outside is partially, at least, a kind of added, like Immanuel Kant would say with his a priori ideas, to our perception of reality. But I'm not a dualist in the sense that I think matter and spirit are just connected, like Descartes said, and then their effect of Plato even, that we live as if we are in a kind of tomb or whatever. No, we are one person with mind as one aspect and body as another aspect, emotion is another aspect. So, and that's one. We are one human being. So that, but that's very interesting. What I wrote my master thesis in Rome on the possibility of intersubjectivity in Kant. And when I hear you talking about like this, then you say the noumenon, or the person, the world outside of me, out of my consciousness, in fact, is totally different than I perceive in my dashboard. Who am I for you?
You are a representation on my dashboard of the thing in itself, the noumenon. And the noumenon is your conscious inner life. It's your feelings, your emotions, your abstractions, your thoughts, your fantasies. That's part of the world as it is. So in that sense, I'm a Schopenhauerian. You know, the world as it is the will, and all I have access to is the representation of the will, and you are part of the will. So your physical body, to me, is an icon that appears on my dashboard, because your physical body is physical, and physicality is what appears on the dashboard. So it's a representation of your conscious inner life, and your conscious inner life is the thing in itself. But I was reacting to what you mentioned, that you heard me at some point deny the existence of a soul. That was a denial of dualism. I think the body we see is what a certain configuration of mind looks like when it's measured and then represented on the dashboard. That's what the body is. It's what your current state of mind looks like when I observe it. What it looks like to me from the outside. That's what your body is. It's not what generates your mind. It's how your state of mind looks like when it's represented
I,
on my dashboard.
I love that idea because we have body language and what we say in our philosophy, it's more Thomistic philosophy. I would say that the body is the best image of the soul. So somehow your facial expression and your whole body language and the way you color and your eyes, the mirror of the soul. I totally agree that you don't only see the molecules of your body, but you see the soul of your body. You see the consciousness somehow expressed in your whole body. So the whole body is an expression of consciousness somehow. I love that idea.
But what that would mean is that when your body is no longer around, when you're not metabolizing anymore, when your body is not active or when it's decomposing, then something very major happens to your state of mind.
Right.
Because if the body is what a certain state of mind looks like, then when the body is no longer around, that state of mind is no longer around.
It belongs to my mind to have a body, but if it's not there anymore, I'm free. Yeah.
But then in what sense would you call that you?
That's a very good question. Even Thomas Aquinas says that you're not really a person anymore when you lose your body. You're not total. So we have the idea of the resurrection of the body, that we will get our body back in a different way. Like Jesus, after his resurrection, got his body back. Not in a body bag, but his body back. So he showed himself to his disciples with the wounds of his crucifixion. But at the same time, he could move through the door. He ate on the one hand, and on the other hand, he could disappear. So this material, immaterial body he had, we expect that, at the end of times. We have the creed, 12 articles of the creed, and we believe in eternal life and the resurrection of the body, which is not a body, but still something kind of, we don't know. St. Paul writes about that in the first letter to the Corinthians, the 15th chapter. If anyone wants to read that, then you... there, St. Paul says we don't know how it works. But there is still this a kind of longing for a bodily expression of our soul. Yes, sure.
Well, if I have time...
Yeah, I
just wanted to add a comment. I thought about it several times during your replies, and I have an opportunity now to bring it up. You mentioned that when people get brain injuries, they may have religious experiences, or NDEs when they no longer have blood pressure. And you mentioned that, okay, it's not ethical to do like in the movie Flatliners in the 90s, in which you deliberately kill somebody and then resurrect that person just to hear the story. Yeah. But we have the next best thing, and most people don't know that. We've known now since 2012, January of 2012, that psychedelics, which everybody thought they light up your brain like a Christmas tree, and they do precisely the opposite. Your brain activity is tremendously reduced under psychedelics, specifically in the default mode network, an area of the brain that correlates with the ego. And that has been now verified for every psychedelic studied with every brain image technology that we have. So MEG, EEG, fMRI has been tried for DMT, psilocin, missing the other substances, but every psychedelic studied has this effect. It's the best model for death we have. And what it has going for this are two things. One, it's proven safe. It's not going to kill you. It cannot kill you. A little dose of psilocin would require you it wouldn't fit into your body, the amount that would be required. And two, you can control the timing of the experience. You can put a subject inside an fMRI scanner, give him a pad with a pen, so he can report the experiences as the experiences are happening, and the whole thing is time-stamped to the brain scan images, so you know what pattern of brain activity goes with what stage of the experience. You cannot say that, oh, it's something the person engendered afterwards. No, the person was reporting that while his brain activity was just below the floor. And what this tells us, what the experiences tell us, is that there is, and the studies tell us, is that there is an inverse correlation between brain activity and the intensity and richness of the psychedelic experience. In other words, the less active your brain is, And to get there, you just apply more of the psychedelic, you inject more of the psychedelic. The less active your brain is, the intenser, the richer, the more significant the experience is.
Yeah, I would almost say that would prove what my point. But I don't.
Final remark on this.
I knew you would like it.
One more reaction.
No. But I don't say if you would damage the brain, that I don't know whether you always have the wonderful experiences. So maybe with this stuff in your brain, it will work. But you can also damage your brain badly, and then I don't know whether
with psychedelics.
No. I'm telling of other things that might cause your tumor or whatever. It might hinder you in thinking, and you might not get this. I also think. I hear this, and I read a lot about it since my youth on the paranormal activities and experiences, and there might be a lot of stuff that is not really serious work. But I think in all cultures you have this experience of getting out of your body, and now of course they try to mimic this with some pushes and whatever. But I think it's possible to get out of your body. You're still connected to your body, but where your consciousness sees things that you could not have seen when you were still in your body. And many people that have had surgery and have been anesthetized, they see something lying on top of a box or whatever, which they couldn't have seen from below, or they heard people saying things which you couldn't have heard according to the doses of anesthesia. And that means that somehow this soul, which is connected to the body and gives life to the body, and still gives life to the body, and is one with the body, even when this happens, is somehow free to get out and get in again. And many people that have an accident or so, they saw themselves laying down there, and then suddenly they get into their body again. And to me, of course, there might be other mechanisms for consciousness to get that experience. So I'm not open. I'm open to any other explanation. But the most simple one, like Occam would say, Occam's razor, is just maybe it just happens that your consciousness can leave the body somehow and get back there. And then I would say that then there will be also consciousness after your body has gone. In Thomistic philosophy, this Thomas Aquinas, which is Aristotelian philosophy in a more, I think, developed fashion, he says thinking, and then that would be a question to you, which I'm interested in very much, is that now what did I want to say? Is there? I wanted to end, and I can't return. Is if the spirit is a kind of independent of matter, and it can also, so if it leaves matter, or the matter is getting away from it and it falls apart around it or whatever, so in fact you don't need matter in order to think. Is it also the other way around, that means that real consciousness is kind of without matter? No, I know the way of thinking I would like to have. So Thomas Aquinas says with Aristotle that we have abstract thinking compared to sensory thinking or perception. So I see a glass, that's a sense perception, but I can also think of a glass in general. That applies to all glasses I have. So that's the essence of a glass. You can define it, and it's kind of higher order of knowledge. The interesting thing is, can a computer reach that level? Can a material brain reach that level? And Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas would say no, because that's a kind of abstract from time and space, and it's kind of a form, abstract form that can exist even without material components somehow. Of course, you have to think of a glass as a material object, but still the fact that you can think about it as a material object means that you yourself are immaterial, because you don't see only this thing, but you see a glass in general. And so when you can do that, when you're still alive and still in your body, or with your body, maybe as an expression of your mind, wouldn't that be an argument to say that if you can do that even when you are alive, you still continue doing that if you're dead? Because if you have a kind of immaterial working of your brain, which is already present now, won't it continue when your body is gone? Because in fact, for this working of your being, you don't need that much matter. And then my second question connected to that is, how does it, in return, work with computers? You mentioned that you were very interested as a young guy, whether you could ever make a computer that would be conscious. And I read something of you that you have this representation of representation, and so, do you ever think that computers can be conscious, like we are? Because consciousness does, according to me, not only mean that you have a kind of self-referential system, but also a kind of transcendence, even of time and space, where you are immaterial in the beginning already. So and then the computer, can a computer who is just matter, I would say, can it ever become conscious? According to me, it can't.
Right. So I think we come to a point that both our speakers realize that there's something more than matter, I think. So how, going back to religion and science, the entity of spirit, the detachment from body and reality, how does that relate to our, appreciation of science and religion? Can the two interact? Are they still very much unfamiliar to each other?
Yeah.
Where are we now?
I was about to go on a tear about nominalism and realism and the Catholic Church endorsement of Aristotle during scholasticism, and why does it still survive, and why everybody ignored Nicolas von Kues. But I'm not going to do any of that.
It's a pity. We will continue afterwards.
Because the question was reframed in a way that sort of makes the problem more palpable. I would invite you to contemplate all this from a slightly different perspective. We tend to think in terms of substance, the material substance and the soul substance, or psyche, the mind substance. What if we drop thinking in terms of substance and we think in terms of the thing in itself and representations, very Kant-like, which is your thesis? That matter no longer has standalone existence. It is not a substance. It's no longer a thing that stands under. In other words, that has standalone reality. It's a representation. Therefore, it only arises from a measurement or from an observation, not to speak physics language. If matter is a representation, then for the same reason that what the dials show on a dashboard in an airplane do not have standalone existence, because if airplane sensors don't measure anything, the dials show nothing. So there is no dashboard if no measurement is being performed. The same applies to matter. If no measurement is being performed, if no observation is being done, there is no matter, because there is nothing to be represented. What is represented is an observation of the world. So the body is not a thing. No physical entity is a thing. It's an appearance. It's what certain mental processes, which may not be personal, they may be transpersonal mental processes in nature. We make this very childish mistake. We acknowledge that there is a world beyond our individual minds. That's obvious. There is a world we all inhabit. If I were to describe this room, my description would be consistent with your description. Obviously, there is something going on beyond our personal minds. But then we go further and we say, and that thing beyond our personal minds is also not mental. Well, why? Your thoughts are mental and they are not in my mind? Why something that is not in the personal minds cannot be mental too? So my hypothesis is, what we call matter, if it's not associated with a living creature, like the matter of this glass, it's just part of a mental representation of mental processes out there, natural mental processes out there, which are not anthropomorphic. They probably don't have a notion of morality. It's just spontaneous stuff that is happening in nature. And the body is what a certain dissociative process in the mind of nature looks like. And eventually that dissociative process comes to an end, like every process in nature. Stars go supernova and turn into black holes, or become red giants, and everything is dynamic in nature. And so that dissociative process eventually comes to an end, and therefore, given enough time, these two bodies are not going to be around, because they are appearances of things that nature is no longer doing. So I would invite you to contemplate all these questions from this perspective. Think of matter not as a substance, but as a representation on the dashboard that evolution equipped us with, which doesn't mirror the world.
No, but I
One final remark, Everard, and then we go to the question. I mean, we
no,
can
no,
go
no.
on for.
I love this philosophical question.
Yeah.
You know, my first question in my philosophy class, I still teach philosophy, is how do you know how the world exists? Because you can't leave your own consciousness. How can you control whether there's an independent world outside of your consciousness if you can't lose and get out of your consciousness in order to qualify this world or to know this world? That's a very interesting question, and many students are, so why is this world, why we think this world is kind of substance, like standing in itself? Somehow there's kind of optimistic that there is this reality. But I understand the question. That's what I wanted to convey, that I understand that it's very hard to get out of your own consciousness. And Descartes tried it with the idea of the infinite. That's the window through which he knew reality, the idée claire et distincte. For him, that were the objective realities. And Levinas, a very famous, more personalist philosopher, he says, is the face of the other. I know because there is a face of the other, that there is someone else there, out there. It's not me. I don't have kind of power over this person. I am ethically responsible for this person even. So there is always kind of looking, since modern times, for escaping your own consciousness in order to see whether there's any objective reality, even substances or actions or however you want to call it. So I understand, and I love the problem, to be honest, because I think it's a real problem and a challenge for our minds. On the other hand, that's what we always say too. What about this time before we appeared on Earth? And that's the same with quantum physics. When they say the observer determines whether it's a wave or a particle, what happened before? Where there were no people around, or when people didn't discover the whole Earth yet? Because they started with this African exodus or whatever, 2, 3, 4 times. And when there were no people around, was this world there? We talk about the world as if it existed 5 billion years. And the sun existed 5 billion years. And it will remain 5 billion years. But if we're not around anymore, will there be a world? So that's a way of thinking that we're so accustomed to. And I love to continue thinking like that, because...
If you can make a very brief comment, because I see our host wants to move on.
It's very short.
But very brief comment.
Very brief.
What happens to the sky when the airplane sensors are no longer making any measurements?
What happens to the sky?
Does the sky disappear because there isn't an airplane making measurements?
No.
Does the sky disappear if there is no dashboard? No, the thing being measured is there. But the physical world is the dashboard. It's not there unless somebody is making an observation. But the world as it actually is, which is not the dashboard, it's the thing being measured, it doesn't care whether there is an airplane sensor making measurements or not.
Okay.
All right.
No,
And it was there before there were airplanes.
Yeah, but then my question, but then the
finish the discussion now.
No, but then my conclusion would be, why not accepting being substances being there, even though they are not measured? Because you see, there's this interference or this kind of complementary action of my dashboard and my perception and representations. But what do you represent in your representations when this world is just there? Even if you think the whole world is one substance, like the pantheists say, the whole world is one substance. So we could discuss that later.
Of course. Under enjoyment of a beer, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. So our brains must be fried. I think we had a very lovely discussion with both our speakers. But of course, yeah, I think some of you might need some clarification or want to ask more questions on sort of things you haven't heard tonight, which you think is very important. So I would like to take maybe like 15 minutes or more to ask a few questions. I think around 4 might be sufficient. So if you could like to ask a question, raise your hand. Here in the middle.
Yes.
The concept of convenient fiction, I wanted to know, how do we discern today whether something is a fact or a constant absolute truth, or something that is just the current convenient fiction of our time?
Bernardo?
There are no absolute truths in science. It's antithetical to the scientific spirit. The scientific spirit is we have the best hypothesis, and it will hold until it doesn't, until we contradict it through experimentation. So science is not in the business of absolute truths. And convenient fictions survive for as long as they are convenient, and they are dropped immediately once they can no longer make sense of the evidence. In other words, if the convenient fiction makes a prediction that is contradicted by observation, that fiction is no longer convenient, and you drop it, and you look for another one, because we need a narrative in terms of which to relate to the world. Even scientists need a narrative, and that's what convenient fictions are. They are modeling tools, theoretical abstractions that help us predict what nature will do next. And that's all there is. And that alone is incredibly important. If we can predict what the body of a patient of cancer will do next, we might cure cancer. So I'm not demeaning science when I'm saying this. I'm just laying the boundaries of the method, which exist. This method is not the ultimate approach to everything that is salient about nature. It's a very, very powerful and useful one. Now, regarding absolute truth, I think if monkeys can speak of it at all, and it's a metaphor, I don't mean this literally. I think all life is created in the image of God, I'll put it that way, including monkeys. If monkeys can speak of anything absolute at all, it will not happen through the mediation of convenient fictions. Convenient fictions are not knowledge by acquaintance. They are conceptual knowledge. We use a set of concepts that point to the actual things in reality, mathematical equations that establish relationships through symbolism between the actual things in reality. But those equations, those convenient fictions, they are not the reality. They are models thereof. But there is another form of knowledge that's not mediated through conceptual arsenal, and that's knowledge by acquaintance. In Dutch, it's the difference between weten and kennen. When you know someone by acquaintance, or when you know of someone. I know of Napoleon, but I don't know Napoleon. But I know my partner by acquaintance. Certain approaches to knowledge that are the only ones that could stand any chance at all of bringing us anywhere near anything that could be remotely described as absolute will perforce be through this knowledge by acquaintance route.
All right. You have a short reply?
No. I mean, only science popularizers mistake scientific convenient fictions for absolute facts. Not real scientists doing the real work. Science is not in the business of absolute truths. It's not how it works. CERN is not in the business of absolute truths. CERN is in the business of a model that makes the right predictions. When you hear about the Higgs boson and leptons and quarks and all that, those are models. They are not even particles. When we speak of elementary subatomic particles, it's a metaphor. There are no particles. There are only fields. 17 quantum fields that we hope to reduce to 1. Nobody has ever seen a Higgs boson. A Higgs boson has never interacted directly with measurement surfaces. Do you know how we know that it exists? Because the Higgs boson is supposed to come into existence and decay into other things almost instantaneously before it can interact with any measurement surface. But we have a theory that predicts what it will decay into. So we measure the footprints left behind. And if the deviation, the statistical deviation is more than 3 sigma, in other words, less than a chance in a million that happened by chance, we declare a discovery. because nature behaves as though a Higgs boson existed. But there is no particle Higgs boson. It's just a theoretical model. You see what I mean? Now,
Bernard,
the predictive...
we have to go to the next question, but...
I actually didn't answer his question.
For us, yes.
You do not need faith to believe in the accuracy of scientific predictions. Those are demonstrated empirically. What would need faith is to believe that the convenient fiction is an absolute truth. And that's a completely different thing.
Thank you very much. Second question.
Yeah, I think so. For the both speakers, maybe, do you consider yourselves realists?
Realists.
Let's give this one to Everard. So, do you consider yourself both realists?
Yeah, depends on to what you refer when you say realist. I think we are all real here, and we cannot deny that we're here. If you say that reality is only material, I would say no. We are also a spiritual reality. So in that sense, I don't deny spiritual realities, but I may be a little bit more positive about material kind of expression of reality. Although I don't know what a right definition of matter would be. I think that would be very interesting to. Yeah. What is reality? I think maybe the last thing is that there's ultimately someone that's philosophical that guarantees that there is a reality. That might be a little mysterious, but somehow nothing is independent in this world. And if you talk about reality, then there is an independent reality which I would mean is God. And God is that's what we call God. Maybe that's the more philosophical way of saying that God is the ultimate guarantee of reality. And I think since He's there, we are here too.
Bernardo, you are also not a materialist, but are you a realist?
What does one mean by this, right? I am an anti-realist when it comes to physical entities. I don't think physical entities have standalone existence. I think they are representations that arise from measurement. So in philosophy of science, I would be an anti-realist. That's why I talk about convenient fictions. I am a realist in the sense that I follow the evidence and the logic.
All right. Next question. In the front.
I don't have a question. I sit here with a lot of brains around me. I am not educated, so I came here, and I think everybody tonight came here for a specific reason, to maybe find answers. I came here for the answer to make sure that I am not mad in what I believe. And what I observed here tonight is exactly what I believe, and you use a language which I don't know. Because if I listen to the one speaker, now for me it is very interesting because I believe in science, and for me science and my belief in God makes a circle, and in that circle it is a yin and a yang. And which is interesting, I have white on the one side and black on the other side. And what the white says, I believe in. What the black says, I believe in as well. But with this is white, it's half of the circle. It doesn't make the circle one. This is black, half of the circle. It doesn't make the circle a circle. But when I put them together, my yin and yang, it makes the circle complete. Now,
if I may interrupt, would you like to reformulate that your reply in the form of a question for one of our speakers? Is that possible?
I don't have a question for them as such, because he is saying science, there is mystery, and the mystery is there. The mystery makes him whole.
I think it might be interesting for one of our speakers to reply to this.
No, if you mean that faith and science are complementary and they can't without one another,
yes.
I think I would agree with that. But I would really stress the fact that science has an independent method, and that theology also has another independent method, and they shouldn't interfere too much. I think if you talk scientifically, you can't do. I think you can't say anything about God, and if you talk theologically, you should abstain from talking about how the universe works, because that's for the scientists. So I think keep them apart. But there are, of course, together, because we are one person, or that knows these two fields, and in us they are connected as two ways of looking at the world. But they're complementary. I don't think that any one of them will be the last word. But I do think that both grow in knowledge. Maybe not that we, in science, just get away with the former paradigm in order to get a totally new paradigm. I believe in more continuity somehow still. But faith is the same thing. I think we grow in knowledge about God somehow, through theology, through mystical experiences. But that doesn't mean that we have finished yet. So that there is the mutual growth. And I think they can help one another to stay sharp. Yeah.
Bernardo, what do you think about this partnership or the unbalance between religion and science?
I agree completely with what has just been said. I think these are different methods. Reality is only one. We approach it in different ways. And these are two different methods, and they both have their advantages and their limitations, and we should use both. On the issue of contradiction, two very quick comments. There are many less contradictions than we think there are. Culture has populated reality with a number of false dichotomies. Let's take sort of a cartoonish example. Either you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. Either you're left or you're right. I mean, this is absurd. To think that you can divide and carve out all the complexity of the situation into two baskets is beyond naive. It's stupid. So that's one level. There are a lot less true dichotomies than we think there are. And on a deeper level, the logic we use, Aristotelian logic endorsed by the church back in the scholastics time, like 600 years ago, 700 years ago, right? No, 800 years ago. No. It was in the 1200s.
Maybe 800. Thomas Aquinas is the 13th century.
Yeah.
Now the 21st century, so.
So Aristotelian logic, every logic is based on a number of axioms. In other words, things that are supposed to be self-evidently true and you cannot argue for it. Aristotelian logic includes an axiom called the law of excluded middle, or the law of non-contradiction, meaning that things are either false or true. They cannot be both, and they cannot be neither. A Dutch philosopher over 100 years ago came up with a different logic, not Aristotelian logic, but intuitionistic logic. And I would invite you to have a look at that, because he rejected the law of excluded middle. He said, because it sounds self-evident, but it has a number of non-intuitive implications, which is used in mathematics. For instance, in mathematics, you can prove that something exists by proving that it cannot not exist. So you've proven that something exists that you have no idea what it is. You can't produce a single example of it because you've proved the contrary. Now, what intuitionistic logic tells you is that no, you can only prove the existence of something if you construct an example, if it's instantiated. And it's not enough to prove that it cannot be false. You have to positively prove the truth. And that's the basis of intuitionistic logic, which eliminates this true-false dichotomy. And it's very seriously taken in many areas of philosophy today. It's not nonsense. It's very seriously considered as perhaps a more mature, a little less naive approach to logic than our friend Aristotle.
I think I mentioned it at the beginning. Was this Brouwers with the intuitionistic? Was this Brouwers?
Brouwers,
Dutch philosopher.
Yeah.
But I think I did it in the beginning with the male and female way of thinking.
You did, yeah.
Just the rational and more intuitive. Quantum computing is I think, more the second way. There's no 1 and 0 as either or, but it's together, and somehow you get to the outcome. So, if I'm right.
Yeah, your institution still forces every theologian to endorse Aristotle.
Come on.
All right. I think we have room for one or two more questions.
That's a projection.
So, who's the next? Yeah?
Thank you. Mine will be like a two-form. One will be a question, and the other one will just be my remark. For the speaker, I want to know, do you believe in the existence of God? My other remark would be that science has its limitation, but the Word of God tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please God. And with faith, nothing shall be impossible to them that believe. So if we believe in the Word of God, and like I said earlier on, God created us in a spirit form, and we are, a trans-existent part of God, and He wants to have a relationship with us. And there's this word that said that God is omnipotent, is omniscient, and is omnipresent, which means He can be present in each and every one of us. He's omnipotent, He's all-powerful. He's omniscient, He's all-knowing. Based on the fact that He created us in His image and likeness, and He breathed His breath into us. So we exist in that spiritual form. Like she said, I'm not scientifically trained, but I'm theologically trained. And I believe in the Word of God, and the Bible has been the absolute truth. So my saying is, God created us, and He can only fellowship with us in terms of His spiritual relationship with us. And if we can, through faith, want to know God and establish that relationship which is ongoing through life, then we can be able to answer a lot of the questions. Another thing is, I don't think we can completely separate science from faith or religion, because my knowledge is that God created us, like we're told in the Garden of Eden, He created Adam and Eve. He did not just create them, but He created a garden for them to exist in. For me, the earth is like the garden, and it's our responsibility to keep on discovering us. And that's where science plays a role in our trying to know God. But there are limitations through science because, for example, you as a scientist, you research on things that you know and that appeals to you, or you become specializing. But God is all-knowing. He encompasses...
Sorry, if I can interrupt.
Sorry?
What do you want to ask the speaker, Bernardo?
I asked, does he believe in the existence of God? That's one question. But the other side, I said, I'm just making my own remark.
Thank you very much.
One other thing, please, I would like to add is that science gives room for research and knowing.
Yeah.
So I will encourage everyone in this room, if you have not read the Bible, go and read the Bible with open-hearted, and then you can really know what God says about science and its existence. Thank you
very much. So, Bernardo, do you believe in God?
What does one mean by God? Right? There are probably 7.5 billion different definitions on planet Earth alone. I believe in my understanding of God. I think that at ground level, reality is one spatially unbound field of subjectivity. We tend to call it quantum field or unified field. There is only one subjectivity going on. Everything else are just the mental dynamics of that field of subjectivity. We are just dissociated mental complexes in that field of subjectivity that look like bodies for as long as the dissociation is going on, and look like the rest of the world once the dissociation ends and the body decomposes into the dust. Are the words omnipresent and omniscient applicable to this field of subjectivity? Well, logically, yes. A field of subjectivity is by definition scient in the sense that it experiences, and if it's all there is, then its experiences are all there is. Is it omnipresent? Yes, because it's all there is. Is it omnipotent? And then I would give a qualified yes. And now I'm going to raise a million questions, and we are never leaving this room today, but yes, God is omnipotent, but it doesn't really know what it's doing. It is not meta-conscious, it's not reflective, it's not capable of deliberation, except through the dissociated minds of deliberating living beings. And in that sense, I think life is literally sacred in the sense of sacrificial, in the sense of to make sacred. Our deliberating, metaconscious, self-reflective minds are a tool of nature or of God for itself. And that's, I think, where we miss out. We think that God has everything it needs, except for some strange masochism related to putting us through all kinds of crap, even though he has already all the answers. I think we miss something here, and that the ancients knew, which is that God needs us. The relationship goes both ways. And I think we have grown to completely ignore that one side of the relationship, which is the service we have to render to the divinity, to the divine mind. We've completely forgotten it. We've turned prayer, as I said earlier, into a ritual for telling God what to do so our needs are fulfilled. But what about what the mind of nature? I'm using different words on purpose here, so you get my drift. What about what the mind of nature needs through us? Because the mind of nature has expended 4.5 billion years of a bloodbath of a natural dynamics in which animals kill one another in order to survive, in which ants are cutting earthworms alive in your backyard every day. It has done all that to itself. So we could be here today contemplating the big questions in a self-reflective, deliberate, self-aware manner. And this is very big. It's probably the biggest thing. And we completely whitewash it.
Right. Thank you very much, Bernardo. We've gone through our time, sadly. I think, like Bernardo said, we have a million questions still, but we can do that over drinks at Luxat Mozam in a few minutes. As a way of summarizing and closing this discussion, I would like to ask both speakers what was something your sparring partner said that really inspired you, and what was the most important thing the other one said. So try to keep it short. Everard, what do you take home from this, from Bernardo's?
I love the fact that you think top down instead of bottom up, in the sense of that science tends to look at even human beings as a kind of things, whereas you start with consciousness. And I think that's the best way to approach the reality of human beings, to start with consciousness and not with the body as it is, as if it's only molecules or something like that. Although the whole machinery around it, we might have discussion about it, also about God, because I wasn't given the opportunity to say that.
Very sorry about that.
Yeah, which I think is over and above all this conscious field, and I don't think God is unconscious or not self-aware. He's much more self-aware than we are, and he's on a higher level than the whole world is, and he's the source of existence. And so I think this field you talk about, which would be very interesting to talk about for, is not kind of last resort. There is something higher that might make this field. I like the concept of field very much, but I have one question also with this dissociated consciousness, because you make a comparison to the multiple personality disorder. I think it's not a disorder; it's order. But God is higher. God is much higher, and He's the ultimate source of being. And then we are here, even if there are conscious vortexes or conscious personalities, then this thing that we're coming from should be self-aware too, because I don't think that something lower can make something higher. Then you get into the same problem with emergence. Then something unconscious causes conscious things. And I don't believe in that. I think only conscious things can create conscious things.
I think God's conscious, but not meta-conscious. It's not metacognitively conscious.
Yeah, but that's what I don't agree. I think He's metacognitive. Because we are. If we are metacognitive, he should be in the upper way even.
Then why isn't my cat metaconscious?
All right, Bernardo. So, on the part of your closing statement, so what is something Everard said that you'll take away tonight?
I have enormous appreciation for Everard's appreciation for direct experience, the direct experience of transcendence. This is not something that can be taken for granted from a church official. There is a history of the church actually trying to repress the direct experience of divinity. Eckhart and von Bingen, we could name a whole list of Christian mystics that have been persecuted in their time. So to me, this is refreshing. I think this is wonderful because I've always regarded liturgy, the ritual of the liturgy, as a help towards the direct experience of divinity.
Yeah, exactly. We 100% agree with that.
All right, thank you very much. These are very excellent points. And I think we will all take them home with us tonight. I'd like to ask the Commission forward for the closing statement.
Yes, thank you. So that's loud. Sorry. First, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for coming here. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, as Cornelis said, take something home and think about it. We'll always be. There is also opportunity to talk about it later with a follow-up and drinks, but I will talk about that more later. I would like to thank the team. Unfortunately, half of them are online. Yes, we really enjoyed the preparations, and now it's finished. That's weird. And then lastly, of course, I want to thank you, Everard, Bernardo, and Cornelis, for doing the talk, for your inspirational knowledge and words. I hope I will remember it. It was not easy, but yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for moderating. I don't think we gave you an easy job, but you did
very good.
You did it great. Thank you. And we have a small gift for you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's a nice, typical Maastricht gift, so I hope you enjoy it. With someone for all three of you. And well, it will be given to them. I want to point out two things.
Thank you so much.
And I have yes, next slide. Two QR codes. On the left side, there's a QR code for a survey, and it would really help us to, when you fill it in, it could help us improve for next Veritas Forums here in Maastricht or anywhere else. So I'd like you to take a few minutes to fill that in. And then I will also explain the right QR code. That's completely voluntary, but if you would like to donate and support the work we do and support the next Veritas Forum, then you can give us a small donation, but feel free. Yeah, I will now give you a few minutes to do the survey and then we'll talk further.
Het is lekkernij.
while you are finishing the survey, take your time. I will go on with my announcements. So we have an opportunity to have drinks later at Bogaardestraat 43B01. And then you can talk with us when you're not finished, and you can share your thoughts and just chill with us. That is this night. When you want to go home and go sleep, that's also fine. We have 2 follow-up meetings. One is next Wednesday at 22nd of June, and the other one is later at 4th of July on Monday. And these are 2 nights when you can just go have a beer with us at Café Tribunaal. It's a half-minute walk from here. And we just talk about the subject or any other problems in life. And you, feel free to join. Yes. You mean the follow-up?
No, the looks at motion.
Yeah, it is, right? Can you? Yeah, I will hand over the microphone.
Yes, the Veritas Forum, we have like a Christian background, so we organize it, but we want to stimulate students to think about the difficult questions in life, taking into account faith and religion, so also the Christian perspective, also other perspectives. Does that more or less answer your question? Yes, like we would like to involve everyone with all religions or non-religions, whatever. Everyone is welcome, and that's what we want to.
It started in Harvard, huh? Yeah, in Harvard started. It was very interesting. But there was more opposition there than here. With a real atheist and a real faithful person, then you got more thunderstorms. Here it's a little calm. Yeah.
Then I have one last thing to say. Sorry. Oh. When you're sitting here and think, oh, this is a nice event, I want to help organize it next time, then please tell me or tell Rianne, and we will keep in contact with you, and then you may be organizing this next time. So I can recommend it. Or slide in our DMs, that's also fine, on Instagram or Facebook. I think that's it. So I will be going to the drinks, so you can just join me, and then you'll find a way. And thank you again. Thanks to the people online for joining, and have a nice evening.